Hi, welcome to Melissa's Money Mindset. Have you ever wondered how much money it would take to afford a house like this, or even this? Well, in today's video, I'm going to break that all down for you, and I'll even take into account today's real estate market, current interest rates, and lender guidelines. Take it from a current homeowner, a real estate investor, and a landlord that some of these numbers may just surprise you. But when it comes to home buying, buying your next home, or even being a first-time home buyer, knowing exactly your top dollar number is so important. And if you stick around until the end of the video, I will show you some really lavish homes in some of the most sought after areas of the country and just exactly how much it would take to afford homes like that. And before we get into the video, if you could please do me a huge favor and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you never miss another money-making tip. Let's get right into it. Now, there's a few things that I wanted to establish before we actually jump into some of these home buying rules. So the first thing I wanted to establish was buying versus renting. Now, when it comes to housing expenses, there's obviously a massive difference between whether you own a property or whether you're just renting the property. You've probably heard the saying that when you rent, you're paying the most you'll ever pay per month, meaning that your rental amount per month is already predetermined. Your landlord is not going to come and slap on a bill usually, unless something really outrageous happens, saying you owe an extra $1,000 this month, or we need a new roof, so we're going to need an extra 30 grand from you this month. On the other hand, when you own a home, paying your monthly mortgage is the least amount of money that you will be paying to own and to reside in that home every single month, meaning that your monthly mortgage is the least of your worries. There's usually always something that is potentially going wrong. You're having a leak. Like I said, you need a new roof. Maybe your hot water heater's gone bad. You need a new furnace. Maybe your air conditioner is not working. When you own a home, there are an abundance of problems that can happen at literally any given moment. And you know who's going to have to pay for those? You. And as an example, when my husband and I bought our very first home, we saved for quite a while to be able to put down 20% on our home. And then literally within the very first month of us living in that home, we had some solar hot water heaters that were very dated. Those broke. And then simultaneously, the actual hot water heater in the basement was 30 years old. How? And that also broke in the first month after the solar hot water heaters broke. So luckily we had purchased the 1-year home warranty, and the home warranty didn't cover the solar hot water panels, but it did buy us a new 50-gallon hot water heater. So that being said, there's kind of always bound to be an issue with a home, and needless to say, home renovations and home projects certainly are not cheap. And in addition to those things, you can also think about the expense of a potential home renovation, maybe your sprinkler system malfunctioning in the summertime, and potential HOA dues going up. Now, we have never owned a home with an HOA exactly for that reason, but again, it's just going to show that when you own a home, expenses can just pile on, and sometimes very unexpectedly. So if you're buying a home, let's talk about a few expenses that you're going to have to understand. So the first is obviously the mortgage. So each month you'll make your mortgage payment, and this monthly mortgage payment is basically a mixture of a principal payment and an interest payment. And typically people have their mortgages amortized over anywhere between 15 years if you're doing, let's say, an ARM, or maybe 30 years if you're doing a traditional fixed rate mortgage. Meaning that, let's say you chose a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, at the end of that 30 years, your home would be paid off and you would own your home in full. Now, let's break this down. So for a fixed rate mortgage, your mortgage will stay the same over the entirety of the loan. Now, on the other hand, you could have an ARM, which is something that usually has a term of somewhere between 5 and 15 years, meaning that after that 5 to 15 year period, you'll have to refinance at a different interest rate. Now, if you're a betting person and you think that mortgage rates will have gone down within that 5 to 15 year range, then this is probably a pretty safe bet. However, if you had taken out an ARM a few years ago, you'd probably be in a world of hurt, considering you'd be refinancing from a 2 or 3% interest rate on your mortgage to now somewhere between a 6 and 8% interest rate on your mortgage. So it's really important to consider the future of the real estate market when you are buying a home. And if you want to play it safe, I highly recommend taking out a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Now, I'm sure you're aware that mortgage rates hit a low in 2021 of 2.5%. That is basically free money, and everybody was flocking to buy a home at that time. Now, obviously, the economy has drastically changed, and primary residence interest rates are sitting between 6 and 8%, I think roughly around 7.5% as of today. The second expense you'll have to take into account are property taxes. Now, property taxes are a percentage of the purchase price of the home or of the assessed value of the home, and these can change on a yearly basis. Typically, property taxes range from 0.3% in states like Hawaii to a little bit more than 2% in Illinois and New Jersey. And property taxes can go up significantly. In the state that I live in Colorado, property taxes will go up as much as 36% next year, meaning that if you paid $4,000, let's say, in property taxes this year, you could pay as much as $5,500 next year. And that's basically because the values of the homes and appreciation are driving home prices up so much that property taxes are really rising astronomically. But I'm going to pop up a few examples right here. This is happening across the nation. Dallas has seen an almost 64% increase in property taxes over the past 5 years. Expense number 3, if you own a home, is home insurance. Now, if you own a property, the lender will likely require that you insure that property, because if your home is not paid in full, if you're not paying cash for your home, that means the bank owns a portion of your home, and they want their asset to be secured and protected just in case anything happens. And this is really important too, just to account for unforeseen circumstances. So if you live in the Midwest, you probably are well acquainted with tornadoes. If you live on the West Coast, you probably are very familiar with earthquakes. And if you live down in the Gulf, you've probably seen a hurricane or two. Now, by us, we have terrible wildfires that affect the state of Colorado every year, and we also have really severe hailstorms. All of our properties got new roofs last year because their roofs were absolutely destroyed by hail. The fourth expense, if you're planning on buying a home, to account for is repairs. Now, like I said before, if you own a home, just plan on something going wrong. Owning a home is so expensive, and there's usually always some kind of a problem coming up. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. So it's better to be prepared than caught by surprise. Now, there is a rule called the 1% rule, which basically says that you should put aside 1% of the total purchase price of your home each year for home maintenance repairs. So let's say you buy a $500,000 home. That means that you should put aside $5,000 per year for unforeseen repairs. Another potentially more lenient rule is the $1 rule, meaning that you should save $1 for every livable square foot. So if you live in a 3,000 square foot home, you should save $3,000 per year to account for these, again, unforeseen repairs. Now, I added a final category here just titled Other because I feel like there's always something coming up. So this kind of just encompasses everything that doesn't fall into the other categories. So in this category, I'm going to put things like a sprinkler system repair, maybe gutter cleanouts, or cleaning your chimney, which you should be doing every 1 to 2 years, especially if you have a wood burning chimney. Basically anything that isn't necessarily wrong with your property, but still needs general upkeep and needs to be addressed. All of this to say, if you are the homeowner, you are obviously responsible for paying all of your own bills, versus on the other hand, if you are renting, all of these expenses that I just mentioned would fall onto your landlord. Now, if you already know that you want to buy a home and you're really not interested in renting, then I will include a timestamp right here that you can jump to the next portion of the video, because now I'm going to jump into renting. Now, as of 2024, the national median rent is just above $2,000. Granted, this varies greatly by location. And generally, when we're talking about how much house or apartment you can afford to rent, there's a good general rule that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your pre-tax income on housing expenses. Now, I will pop up a chart right here showing you just how much rent you could afford. If you made $40,000 per year, you can afford to spend $1,000 per month on rent. If you make $80,000 per year, you can spend $2,000 per month on rent. And if you make $160,000 per year, that means you can spend $4,000 per month on rent. However, this 30% rule was created before we had astronomically high car prices. And now the average car monthly payment in the United States is above $700 per month. Another thing to take into account is that student loan rates are at an all-time high. The cost of education in this country is absolutely crazy. And so those are all things that will then impact how much you can afford to pay for housing. So here is a more conservative model. And that rule is called the 50-30-20 rule, which means that you can spend 50% of your pre-tax income on housing, food, and transportation, 30% on wants like clothing, travel, or hobbies, and the remaining 20% on savings or let's say student loans. But again, with the cost of cars being so high at the moment, the cost of gas being so high, and the cost of student loans really taking up a large portion of people's budgets, with this model, you could actually end up being able to afford even less than the previous rule. Now, I recommend good old budgeting. Sit down with your friend, Excel spreadsheets, and make a list of all of your non-negotiables. What do you absolutely have to pay for each month without fail? That could be car payment, car insurance, gas, maybe childcare or paying for pet food or even vet bills. Everyone has something, even monthly subscriptions, something really small like Spotify, which I think is like $11 per month. Put that in your spreadsheet because all the little things like that, even a Netflix subscription adds up. And I highly advise, no matter how much money you make, setting aside 20% of your income just in case you have to pay in during tax season. Now, a lot of Americans get a refund during tax season, and that's great for them. But I never want you to feel like you're pinching pennies if things go the opposite way and you actually haven't been paying enough in tax throughout the year. Now, I also think that there's a little bit of room for fun here. So maybe leave yourself 10% of your income as fun money if you can afford to do so. And then whatever is left over, you can basically then spend on rent. And for most people, this will be somewhere around 20%. So let's look at some examples using this 20% method. So to afford a property in the $2,800 per month range, you'd need to make roughly $170,000 per year. To afford a property that costs around $3,500 per month, you'd have to make around $210,000 per year. And for a much more extravagant property like this one for $15,000, you'd need to make $900,000 per year. However, remember, these are just guidelines. And of course, if you plan on having roommates, that can really help you out here, especially in affording maybe a bigger place or a little bit nicer place. I definitely had roommates all through college so that we could stay in a little bit nicer house. So that's always something to take into consideration. Or even if you're living with a partner, having two incomes is often better than just having one. But again, sticking to somewhere between that 20 to 30% should be pretty manageable in the long run. Okay, so now let's move on to buying a home. So I'm just going to preface all of these examples by saying that I'm going to assume you can put down 20% on the price of your home, and that will kind of simplify our calculations for the sake of this video, assuming that you don't have to pay mortgage insurance. Now, I'll also say that if you do want to put 20% down on a home now, it could take you a while. It could take you a few months. It could even take you a few years just because the prices of houses have gone up so astronomically. So please don't be deterred by that. I think home ownership is a wonderful thing if you can afford to do it. It helps build your net worth. You own equity, you own something rather than just renting and paying someone else that then owns an asset. And even if you can only afford to save a few $100s per month, I think that is a huge step in potentially the right direction. And if you don't want to wait until you can put 20% down on a property, that is completely fine. And I also advise you looking into an FHA loan. And with an FHA loan, I believe you can put down as little as 3.5% on whatever property you're interested in. So that would be a huge cost savings, at least upfront for you. Now, your monthly mortgage payment would be a little bit higher since you're not putting down as much money upfront, but I guess it's kind of just a trade-off and you have to decide which of those things is most important to you. So let's keep all of those things in mind as we're discussing the next few buying rules. So the first rule that I want to talk about is the 28-36 rule, meaning that you should spend no more than 28% of your pre-tax income on your mortgage payment. Now, this should include taxes and insurance, and no more than 36% of your pre-tax income on all debts. So I'm talking mortgage payments, car payments, and any student loans or anything that falls into that category. So let's say that you make $50,000 a year. That's $4,166.67 per month. So 28% of that amount is just shy of $1,200 per month. So for that amount, you could afford a house like this with 20% down. Now, if you're a little bit shocked about how little $50,000 a year can get you, I want to just show you basically the power of interest rates. Now, if we had done this same calculation just a few years ago, when interest rates were simply 3%, you could have afforded a home with a value of $270,000. And if you were curious, that means you'd have to make $132,000 per year to afford a $500,000 home, $200,000 per year to afford a $750,000 home, and $265,000 per year to afford a $1 million home, assuming you're putting down 20% on each property. Now, all of this is lender dependent, so make sure that you're sitting down with your lender, talking housing prices, talking income, talking debts, talking DTI, and really coming to an agreement on whatever your housing budget is. So now on to the second rule, which is the 30-33 rule. And this implies that you don't spend more than 30% of your gross monthly income on your mortgage, you save 30% of your home's value in cash, and you buy a home that costs no more than 3 times your annual gross income. So let's say you make $120,000 per year. So your monthly allocated mortgage expenses have to be less than $3,000 per month. This will allow you to save 30% of your home's value in cash and simultaneously means that your home should not cost more than $360,000. So using this rule, if you make $50,000 per year, you should limit your housing price to $150,000. If you make $100,000 a year, you should limit your housing price to $300,000. And if you make $200,000 per year, you should limit your housing price to $600,000. Now, again, all of these are simply guidelines and they honestly might not be very realistic wherever you live. In California, people spend 9 times their annual income on housing. And in Colorado, where I live, people spend roughly 7 times their annual income on housing. So I live near Boulder, Colorado, and the median home price here is currently $1.4 million. And that doesn't even get you a very big home or a very nice home. But that means in order to afford a home like this, you would have to be making roughly $467,000 a year. Granted, there are a ton of self-employed business owners and high-paying tech companies here, but like I previously mentioned, this might mean spending a bit more than 3 times your salary to even be able to compete in a market like this. But as a real estate investor and a homeowner, I really enjoy this 30-33 rule because it means that inevitably when things do break, you'll have money set aside to account for that. And if you want to look at things from a lender's perspective, they basically just care about how much money you bring in, so your income, and how much debt you have, and basically the ratio of those two things, so your debt to income ratio. And they'll probably ask you a few important questions like, what is your monthly income? Do you have stable employment? And they might want to see your tax returns for the past 2 years. And if you're self-employed, they might need even more information from you. So now moving on to the debt portion. So most lenders prefer that you keep your DTI, your debt to income ratio, less than 45%, meaning that it takes up less than 45% of your pre-tax income. So for example, let's say that you make $75,000 per year. That means a lender wants all of your combined debts to be less than $33,750 a year, or roughly $2,800 per month. So let's say that when they check what your current credit card balance is, you are carrying a $300 credit card balance. You also pay $500 a month for your car, and you pay $400 a month in student loans. That means you'd be approved for a property like this with a monthly mortgage around $1,600, or a house price around $250,000, assuming that you're putting 20% down. Now, let's say you don't have any student loans, you don't have a car payment, and when they check your credit card balance, it's zero. So that means that you could potentially spend the full $2,800 monthly allowance going towards a mortgage, which would get you significantly more house like this one. Now, do I really think that this is the smartest way to go about this? Probably not, because it's not very realistic to say, well, if a typical mortgage is 30 years, I'll never have any other expenses on top of my current expenses for the 30-year period. You'll likely need money for something in the future. You'll probably buy a new car at some point. You might want a new tech toy. You might want to take up a new hobby, or maybe you plan on having children or getting married. All of these things are super expensive. Now, at the end of the day, it's ultimately up to you, and if you have a partner, you and your partner, to decide whether buying or renting is the right decision for you right now. Now, my husband and I, when we bought our first house back in 2018, were able to kind of see the upward trajectory of the Colorado housing market. And so we bought right before the housing market started to take off. And we thought that we got in at a pretty reasonable price considering the Colorado market. And now that house has tripled in value just based on appreciation since we purchased it a few years ago. Now, I completely understand that not everybody is in a financial position to be able to even afford to buy a home, to put a down payment on a home. And so if renting is right for you right now, then that is completely fine. And honestly, it's cheaper to rent in most places in the United States instead of buying. In fact, a recent study found that renting is about 37% cheaper than owning a home. and you don't have to put any money down when you're renting. Now, of course, on the flip side, you're not gaining any equity when you're paying rent. You're basically helping somebody else gain equity in their property. But on the flip side of that, you're also not responsible for anything financially that could potentially go wrong with the property. So if you don't have to buy a home right now, I would honestly consider waiting until interest rates come down a little bit. I know the Fed just came out and said that rates are not going to drop as much as they had initially anticipated, even in 2025 and 2026. So if that means waiting somewhere between 2027 and 2030 to buy a home, then you may be better off just waiting. And my personal advice, if you do decide that you want to buy a home, I highly recommend finding a realtor that you actually enjoy working with. We've had quite a few realtors that we've worked with over the years. Some of them have been a complete nightmare to work with, and some of them have really taken the time to pick and choose exactly what houses they want to take us to see and are really realistic about the price that you could get the house for, the interest rate that you can get the house for, and potentially any problems that come with the property. I also advise consider trying to negotiate on housing prices. Now, I know that the price of a house right now is absolutely astronomical, but at least by us, I am seeing properties sit on the market a little bit longer than they usually do. And so typically you'll see a price reduction or they'll just continue to sit, and that's the perfect time to come in with a low ball offer. My other advice is to not get too emotionally attached to a home. Now, not to be a Debbie Downer, but there's so many things, so many problems that could come up that could cause a housing purchase to potentially fall through. Maybe you go to do the home inspection and you see that there's a ton of foundation issues and that's just not in your budget or not something that you feel comfortable taking on. That is a huge reason that people potentially back out of a deal. But even if they do find something minor, let's say they find just some cosmetic damage during a home inspection, don't let really minor things like that kill a home purchase for you, because you can always fix small cosmetic things like that. And another thing to consider is potentially finding a home that will fit your needs for somewhere between the next 7 and 10 years. I believe the average duration that an American has owned their home is roughly around 7 years. So people are moving roughly every 7 years. And of course, my last piece of advice is to try to find the right lender for you. My husband and I have multiple investment properties and we're continuing to buy when it makes sense in this market. But we have a great realtor. We look at hundreds, if not thousands of homes before we sometimes even make a single offer. So we have a very, very patient realtor. And oftentimes our offers are lowball offers. And again, like I said, if the market makes sense for that, then I think that's totally appropriate. And of course, if you're acting as a real estate investor, you obviously want to make sure that, especially with the current high interest rates, those properties are actually going to cash flow for you. Now, the point of saying all this is that I want you to feel like you are buying real estate, if you choose to do so, on your own terms. And if the deal doesn't work out, then the deal doesn't work out and you can always go find another home. And now for the really fun part of this video. So let's say you put 30% down, so $39 million down, $58,000 a month in insurance, and almost $200,000 per month in property taxes. And all of that information basically puts your monthly mortgage around $1.25 million. So using our 30-33 rule, that means you'd have to make roughly $45 million a year to afford a property like this comfortably. But let's be honest, whoever is buying this house is buying it in cash. So that's all the information I have for you today about how much home you can afford by salary. I hope this video was informative and maybe a little bit fun for you even at the very end. As always, feel free to follow me on my social channels right here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.